Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I am Andrea Woodard. I'm Senior Vice President of Government Relations and Public Policy here at the Greater Des Moines Partnership. We welcome you to our first of our webinar, Civility Webinar events, and just want to encourage everyone to put yourselves on mute, turn on your video. We will pin our speaker to the Zoom link so that you can see our presenters front and center, but do want to encourage everyone to be present and participate in today's program. As well as wanted to let you know, we are recording today's session. We will be sharing the whole recording, and you'll receive that once we've gotten this all cleaned up. We want to make sure that you have it available to share with your team, utilize it as a tool moving forward. And throughout the session, please do put any questions you have in the chat. We'll moderate those towards the end of the program. So with that, I'd like to just give you a little bit of background, and then I'll introduce our main presenter for the day. So the Greater Des Moines Partnership, Capital Crossroads, and the Robert D. and Billie Ray Center at Drake University are hosting this Civility Webinar, these Civility Webinars, which will focus on a variety of civility topics to enhance a culture of excellence in the Greater Des Moines region. The Civility Webinar topics will educate our participants with research-based strategies to enhance civility through core leadership competencies that create a culture of excellence and optimal performance. Each webinar, as you see in front of you, will be 60 minutes in length and can be viewed as a complete series or as individual units. Today's topic, we will focus on relationships, communication, and team. So with that, I'd like to introduce, again, our main presenter, Scott Racker, Executive Director of the Robert D. and Billie Ray Center at Drake University. Scott serves as the Executive Director, where he's been in a position he's held since the work of the center was founded by former Governor Robert D. Ray as a lasting legacy to the Iowa sesquicentennial in 1997. Scott's commitment to positively impacting the lives of others was reflected in his 14 years of public service as a member of the Iowa House of Representatives from 1999 to 2012. And with that public service experience and professional passion for civility, that has led to his work with the Ray Center, impacting state legislative leaders and staff in all 50 states and U.S. territories, as well as leaders in Canada and Mexico. We have the great privilege of getting to work with Scott and his work at the center. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to you, Scott. Take it away.
Thanks, Andrea. I appreciate it very much. A very kind introduction. And I want to thank everybody for joining us so early in the morning on a topic that's really important and foundational to who we are as a community and a society. And I just also want to thank Andrea, not only for the introduction, but the planning of this, and Ryan and Mike, who are the behind the scenes people that have helped me in preparation to make sure all the IT goes well. And certainly Jay for his leadership here. We've been focused collectively as organizations on civility in our community for many years. As many of you may know, and if not, I want to share with you that when Capital Crossroads and that strategic plan was first developed in our community from the outside entities, we were the first community in the country that civility rose to an actionable item within the strategic plan of what did we aspire to become as a community, and that's now continued to infiltrate throughout all of the Capital Crossroads organizations and groups. But it's not something that we just talk about. It's about action and actionables. And what we want to try and provide for you throughout these events are some strategies that you can use and tools that you can take back as we deal with civility issues continuing in our community. So I just want to thank everybody for their participation this morning. Please think of questions, because we've actually timed the presentation to leave time for questions to be asked, and hopefully be able to answer those for you as well. I'm pulling up my PowerPoint here to begin the slides. So again, we're talking today about relationships, communication, and teamwork. Andrea, I assume everybody can see that?
Yes, you're all good, Scott.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much. So teamwork is really put together through building relationships and communications. The things that I want you to be thinking about today as I walk through this is how and where can I use these strategies? The things that we're going to talk about today in many cases will not be new concepts or items for you, but we're trying to bring them to you in a way that you're thinking of them intentionally with civility in mind, and what can I do and how can I use that within civility. So our work at the Ray Center's mission is to improve civility through character development and ethical leadership. Former Governor Robert D. Ray, who served 14 years as governor of the state of Iowa, was chair of the sesquicentennial, had a vision that the outcome of the sesquicentennial celebration in 1996 would also leave a lasting legacy that would positively impact the quality of life in Iowa. And as he talked about that and the committee worked around that, they came up with this mission to recognize, enhance, and sustain the positive qualities of Iowans in order to promote civility through character development and ethical leadership. Governor Ray's premise, which I believe wholeheartedly and I've seen in action, is that when we enhance our best character competencies and our own ethical leadership, that one of the outcomes of that is civility. And it happens at every age and every stage of life. One of the challenges I think we have right now is really honing in on what do we mean by civility. And I want to be very intentional with you about that as well. There are components of civility that deal with kindness, that etiquette, with manners, with getting along, but it goes so much deeper than that. And it's that deeper elements of civility that we're really trying to talk about and how it impacts ourselves right now in our businesses, our community at large, our state, and more, in fact, nationally and globally. We're talking about how do we disagree without being disagreeable? How do we have those challenging and difficult conversations that need to take place? Those are conversations that are taking place in businesses and our community right now. That's the depth of civility we want to talk about. The other thing that I want to share about this is that it's so easy right now, I think, to be finger pointers when it comes to civility, pointing out when other people are not doing things right or well. And clearly, as we just came through the last election, people point to incivility in what they saw in our political environment. But I want you to move away from just the global and the political. I want you to think about individual actions. So as we thought about this with Governor Ray, and we're moving forward on this whole premise of trying to improve civility as we enhanced our character and leadership, we started with the character counts framework. And the reason I bring this up, many of you are familiar with character counts. You say, I know that. Those are those 6 pillars of character. That's what we do with our youth in their schools and youth service organizations. And it is. However, I think to simplify things for me, in fact, even when I served in the legislature, the 6 pillars are lifelong opportunities for us to think of them in the I and action orientation. What I mean by that is today even, I drive to work and I think, what can I, Scott Racker, do to act in a capacity worthy of trust? What can I do to treat people with respect, regardless of how they may treat me, who they are, what opinions they may hold? What can I do to be responsible and accountable for the choices I make and the consequences that come from those choices? What can I do to be fair and equitable in my decisions, where people get what they're due and what is deserving? Can I demonstrate a caring heart? And can I be a good citizen? Can I do my duty and fulfill my responsibilities to the communities that I'm a part of? So I bring this to you as the foundational element of our work. In fact, we're now the global home for character counts and serve over 8 million youth worldwide. But this lens of core values, of core character competencies in action is what is the base for civility. I'd also tell you, I believe it's the base for relationship building, it's the base for leadership, and it's base for teamwork. When you have these things operating at a high level in an organization, you know things are moving toward optimal performance. And research is very clear in our organization. We've worked with our partner organization, the Excellence with Integrity Institute, over 30 years of research on what does it take to create a culture of excellence and optimal performance. When you look at these items on this slide and you think of your own workplace environment and think of when things are going really well in the workplace, I would postulate to you that you would see these items: excellence, integrity, growth and balance, and teamwork and community all operating well within your workplace environment, or in fact, in our community environment. And when we're challenged, when things aren't going well, there may be some of these that are not operating at the highest of levels. Today, what we want to focus on is civility. And how do we intentionally build that culture where we can have those difficult conversations, where we can address the challenging issues? And I would tell you that I think we've got a great We've got a great basis for this already in our community, but I think we can be a national beacon of light for how we address the challenging issues in our community. And it happens workplace by workplace, community by community, and our regional efforts as we work together better. And it starts with relationship building. The opportunity for us to go from surface to substantive relationships. And it really has the courage and curiosity to connect. And this is a challenge that I'd lay out to us. This has been especially demanding for us as we entered this entire COVID pandemic, the separation of not being able to be in person, moving to more of these electronic and virtual meeting opportunities, really takes us away from that core element of relationship building. And we tend to be very task oriented. What's the purpose of the call and how do we get things done, rather than taking the time to build relationship. And I'll tell you, just as an example, we were on this call for a few minutes in advance, just so we could test out the IT and everything. Learned that Ryan is expecting, he and his wife, their first child, which gave us an opportunity to talk about some of our own experiences. It was very quick. Now, I don't know Ryan well, but I connected with him today from a little bit deeper than just the surface. Yesterday, when we talked in preparation for this, it was all about the task. It was all about what we had to work on. But in this case today, we took the opportunity to go just a little bit deeper. My point is that we need to be intentional about building relationships. So again, with this type of program formatting, I want you to be thinking about, where can I be more intentional about building relationships that would help advance the opportunity to have difficult conversations. And I want to show you a video of two people here in the metro community that's been used nationally as an example of what does it look like when you move to have the courage and curiosity to get to know someone that's different than you are, that has different feelings, thoughts, and opportunities to learn from each other. So I'm going to pull this video up and have you listen to this. And I want you to be thinking about, as you listen to this, what are the lessons that we could learn from this video?
Well, a friend of mine passed away, and she was all about reconciliation, always about reaching out to people and to unlikely people. When she passed away, I wanted to do something to honor her. And I thought, who would be the most unlikely person on the planet that I would reach out to? And it was Bob.
I'm the president and CEO of the Family Leader, and our mission statement is to strengthen families by inspiring Christ-like leadership in the home, the church, and government.
I'm the executive director at One Iowa, which is the state's largest lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender organization. I've been an activist and an advocate and sometimes an agitator in this movement for almost 30 years.
Well, Donna and I, we see the world very differently. In our view on marriage, on sexuality, and probably on a lot of other issues.
I guess you'd have to say that my impression of Bob was not only he was the opposition, he was the enemy.
I've probably made statements about her and her organization in the press. She's probably made statements about me and my organization in the press. We weren't natural allies. We weren't natural coffee buddies. And so she emailed the Family Leader and said, hey, I talked to Bob, and Bob said he'd be willing to do coffee. Let me know a good time and date. And so they shared that email with me like, is this true? I mean, is this real? And I said, yeah, it's real, but I never thought she'd follow up on it.
I never thought that he would respond.
And so we set a date to have coffee.
And that was the beginning of this amazing journey. I remember walking in just being very nervous. I had no idea what to expect, none at all.
Well, the skeptic in me thought she would have an agenda, and she probably thought I might have an agenda. But as soon as we sat down, I thought, she doesn't have an agenda. She just wants to get to know who I am. And that really compelled me to say, I should want to get to know who she is.
I think when people have the courage to show you who they are, something happens. And so what surprised me about Bob was his humanity. He's an incredible dad. I also found him to be really funny, and I didn't expect that at all. But we laugh a lot.
Donna's a very good person. She's a passionate person. She has advocated for her issues tirelessly for over 3 decades. So regardless if I agree or disagree with her on the issues, I have a tremendous respect for her.
For a long time, I've been really tired of the hate and the aggression and the kind of snarkiness. We can disagree without being disagreeable. We can fight the good fight in the court of public opinion, but we don't have to hurt each other. That's, I think, the big takeaway for me. We don't have to hurt each other, because when we do that, we're hurting ourselves. We get coffee about once every couple of months.
And I think with Donna, her and I readily assessed that we have a lot of common interest. We have some common ground. The only regret in all of that is that I wasn't the one to ask her out for coffee. And she's the one who asked me out. And I'm glad she did, but I kind of feel like I should have.
What surprised me was not that he liked me. I thought, yeah, he'd like me. What surprised me was I really liked him.
It hasn't changed my beliefs. It may have changed my approach, because when we do put out a press release, when we do make a public statement, many times I think, I wonder how Donna will view this.
Here's the deal. If Bob and I can have coffee, if we can tell stories and laugh and get to know each other, if we can like each other, then I think almost anyone can find that person in their life, and maybe they can reach out their hand and invite them in.
That's one of Mutual of Omaha's aha moments. It was actually filmed in 2015, and a 30-second clip of that aired as a Super Bowl ad in the 2016 Super Bowl. The relationship between Bob and Donna spanned many years since 2015 when they started. And Donna had left One Iowa, and then she unfortunately passed away just a couple of years ago. And as context for that, what was interesting, I found, and if you'd be interested in it, you can go to YouTube and find this clip, is that Donna and her wife, knowing Donna was going to be passing away and planning her service and celebration of life, they developed a relationship, Bob and Donna, that Donna and her wife actually asked Bob to be one of the people that spoke at her celebration of life. And it's a very poignant piece. If you'd ever like to see that, you can look it up on your own. When I was at the Capitol and serving in the legislature, I worked with both Bob and Donna on some issues, and I had good friendships with both. These at the time were people that were politically polar opposites. So when we talk about having the courage and curiosity to meet people that are new and different, this is a great teaching example for us. And remember, Donna's motivation was that she had a lifelong friend that was all about reconciliation that had passed away, and she wanted to honor that person. So that's why she reached out to Bob. And as you heard in the clip, after they went through this initial period of building a relationship, Bob was the one feeling like, I really should have been the one to ask her. And so I think one of the important takeaways from this is we all have people in our life that might be unlikely people for us to meet. Now, you don't need to be as, polar or separated potentially as Bob and Donna were, but as Donna said, if she and Bob can get together, anybody can. So who would be an unlikely person, and would you be willing to reach out and to follow up with them and see if you could get together? Not with any agenda, but other than just to get to know each other, the foundational relationships. Now, I know that there's two elements I want to be speaking to here. This is proactive and intentional and takes time to develop these relationships, and we should be moving on this pathway. There are also times when we have to address difficult and challenging issues where we don't yet have a relationship with the person or the group that we need to deal with. I acknowledge that. But the proactivity we can take now in building intentional relationships can span across this community. One of the other challenges and opportunities I see in our community, we are a rich community when it comes to the opportunity for cross-generational leadership connectivity. There's not a leader in this community that someone could not have the opportunity to meet with. And as we cultivate new young leaders in our community, we need to be reaching out and building these relationships across the generational spans as well. So I'd encourage you to have the courage to reach out, and if someone reaches out to you, to respond. And when you're building those relationships, seek first the common ground and the connections, not what the agenda, as I said, but what are the things that you've got in common. I was talking earlier again in this conversation with Mike. Mike and I both have children that had issues with sleeping when they were little. And I'll tell you something, if you've had that in your life, it is a common connection. Despite any other things you believe in life, you have a common connecting point with children that wouldn't sleep when they were babies. And there's a shared experience there. And that starts to break down barriers and enhance the general humanity that we have. I think it's interesting in this, they talk about that we can disagree without being disagreeable, and we don't have to hurt each other. These are great mindsets for us to be thinking about, not only in relationships, but in our community engagements. And people have strong beliefs, but building relationships with others doesn't mean that you have to change your beliefs. It might be your approach or strategies, as Bob indicated, but that it is an opportunity for us to enhance our community, our communitas, if you will. So finding those people and reaching out can be challenging. And the best way, I think, again, that I drill it back to of a core value that we're dealing with is respect. How do we demonstrate that respect with each other? One of the challenges is, as we look at respect, and what do we really mean by respect? Well, the essence of respect itself is to treat people with respect. It's really a duty, if you think of it, to treat all people with respect, regardless of how they treat you or what they may believe or how they may have acted. And unfortunately, in our world today, and it has been for some time, we live in a reactionary, disrespectful society. I find this a fascinating image. This is a poster that's actually out for sale. It says, "Respect, demand it." It's probably a 5 or 6 year old little boy. I've circled out his hand there because he's holding up one finger, and it's not the "I'm number one." I'm looking at that and I think a couple of things. One, what is it that causes a 5 or 6 year old little boy to have this reaction out on the soccer pitch with whatever had happened? And also that we're a society that thinks this is a great enough thing that we're going to make a poster out of it and monetize it, that it's cute. And for some, it might be cute, but I get deeper into what's the reaction that causes this. Think about this. This young man potentially grows up and he's your next intern from college or your next employee, and he doesn't like what somebody did in the office, and that's not the reaction that we want to see. And I start to think about where do we learn these things and how does it happen? And quite candidly, I came across this. This was the South Carolina Clemson football game a couple of years ago. I think that that man could potentially be that young man's father. He had both of his fingers up there, and ESPN actually did a hold on him, and they talked about him and wondered what his mother and or his boss might think about his reaction to this game. So it's just a reminder that when it comes to respect, modeling is important. And we're all models, even though we may not think that or see that. But when people see the way we act, they act that way. I really like this quote from Jefferson. Jefferson himself, certainly not a perfect man, but I love this quote. "Sir, I will treat you like a gentleman, not because you are one, but because I am." Respect is an internal, reflective, and it's, again, a mindset. We talk about respect, you haven't earned it, respect, you don't deserve it. Flip that around. If the mindset that we deliver every day is, I'm going to treat you with respect, because respect is about how I treat others, not how you treat me. And I think that gives us a context for how we enter into and build relationships. The last piece I want to talk about relationships is tie this into a modeling of former Governor Ray. Governor Ray's in the white shirt in the left on this photo. This is at the state capitol during his years of service as governor. Governor Ray had a ping pong table in the Capitol, and he played ping pong with every legislator every year, and they played by 2 sets of rules. They played by the rules of ping pong, and he was very good. And the other rule was you could not talk about state budget, you couldn't talk about policy, you couldn't talk about departments, you could talk about your vacations, your hobbies, your family, your interests. Governor Ray used the ping pong table as a tool to build relationships. This particular picture is in the mid-'70s, after President Nixon had opened China for diplomatic relations, where we had not talked to the Chinese diplomatically for decades. China was considered the enemy. Governor Ray was on the next delegation that went to China, and he invited the Chinese nationals to come to Iowa through the State Department. When the Chinese nationals came, Governor Ray had the ping pong table moved into the conference room, the press conference room, which is now called the Robert D. Ray Conference Room at the Capitol. It's the only time they moved it in that conference room. And when the Chinese nationals arrived in Iowa, rather than going to the formal office for détente and signing of documents, they went downstairs and they played ping pong for 2 hours. And Governor Ray used this as an opportunity to build friendships and relationships with people that were new. They were different. They had previously been the enemy. And of course, if you fast forward that story through that relationship that started, there was a relationship that developed through then young Lieutenant Governor Perry Branstad, who formed a lifelong relationship with one of the Chinese officials' son, provincial government's son. That fast forward, then that son of that provincial governor is now President Xi Jinping. And of course, Ambassador Branstad was asked to be our U.S. ambassador to China. And I believe there's some depth of relationship of why that happened, that we had an existing relationship that happened to start over a ping pong table of people building relationship. So the first point of this, and in fact, we spent probably half our time this morning on this because it's so critically important, is the intentionality of building relationships of people that are new and different, and translate that into your office environment, translate that into our community, and keep in mind the challenges that we have still in the pandemic era of how are we being intentional about building relationships. The next piece that I want to just ask you is this. There's 33 or more people on this call. What would it look like if each one of you were interested enough in civility as a topic that you must be thinking, what can I do to help our community, my organization be better? What if each one of you thought about a least likely person for you to meet? And they don't need to be as polar opposite as, say, Bob and Donna. It might be somebody in the office that just thinks differently about approaching projects than you do. What would it look like if you reached out to meet them just to get to know them better? A 30-minute call and cup of coffee just to find out more about their family and what their plans are coming out of the pandemic. And I'd encourage you to do that. And if 30 of you do that, that's 60 people that are going to be impacted of breaking down barriers and building relationships. And I guarantee that you will find that will have advantages in your moving forward in both your leadership and the enhancement to our community. The next piece that I want to jump into here is really talking about how you shape culture in teams. We like this mantra, we shape the culture and the culture shapes the character. Every organization that's represented by you here on this call has core values. They might not be identical to the 6 pillars. There might be something about diversity, equity, inclusion. We look at those, and I had the opportunity recently to speak to Bankers Trust's annual meetings. And one of the things I really love about Bankers Trust is that they've got this great set of core values, but they put them in action. They're known in our community as a place that doesn't just say that we embrace diversity, they act upon that in not only their employment relationships, but those with their consumers. So they shape that culture, and then that culture shapes the expectations and the character that we have. And as we talk about that, one of the strategies that I would bring to you is a very simple tool and strategy that we call a compact for excellence. It's really ground rules for engagement. And it's a simple question to ask yourself and your team. And the question is, what would it take for us to do our best work and treat each other with care and respect? What can we agree to do and to not do? And this is a portable type compact. You can use this compact if you're coming into a challenging one-on-one conversation. I've used this in performance reviews before, where before we get into the performance review, it's like, I want to be candid with you. I want to be honest with you. I'm bringing feedback to you that I hope can, enhance your ability to work even better in our organization. And I want to be an active listener to you. I want to understand the challenges that you're facing and the opportunities that you see for growth. This particular one that I pulled up here and am using as an example for you actually was the one that was developed by the working group, the governance working group for the DART Commission several years ago, and with support and encouragement by the partnership. The Des Moines Area Regional Transit was looking at how did they advance their strategic plan, their funding formula, and it was clearly evident that there was a governance challenge with how the commission was set up. That commission formed a task force to review governance. In a 4-month period, asked them to come back with a recommendation of a new governance structure. For about 19 or 20 people representing the different municipalities that were involved, the partnership, the business community, And when we opened that up, we were asked to help facilitate this. The first thing that we did was we went around the room with a whiteboard and we asked the people at the table, what would it take for us to do our best work and treat each other with care and respect? And these are the things that they came up with. They wanted to participate, to actively participate, and then they identified that meant we didn't want people to hide and we didn't want people to dominate in that conversation. They talked about what listening actively meant, to really listen through what people were saying, to seek to understand what they were saying, that we would respect each other and the process, that we would use essential IT use, which looked quite candidly different 4 years ago than it looks right now, as we use IT so much differently in our meetings. They wanted to be open to new ideas. They wanted to have candid conversations. And I rephrase this because the wording was to keep our work fenced by the governance topics. It was not a group that was going to talk about the funding strategies or the service delivery. It would be fenced by the topic. The point is that we identified that together. The group then agreed that they would hold themselves and others accountable to this. And interestingly enough, in the very first meeting, we had a situation where part of the listening actively was that we were going to listen and not have sidebar conversations, and we had a sidebar conversation going on. So we waited, we addressed it, and throughout the rest of those months of meetings, we never had another sidebar conversation because there was accountability around that. The reason I bring this to you is I found this to be exceptionally helpful in the workplace environment as well, and in our community environment. We just did some sessions not too long ago with the affordable housing of what does it look like for us to have conversations around affordable housing in our community? What are the challenges and how do we move towards resolution of those challenging issues? So I'd encourage you to think a little bit about what it might look like for you and where could you use a compact for excellence as it relates to any opportunity in our community or in your workplace. The other thing that I just want to pause and mention about that DART as I was thinking about, and I think, in fact, Andrea might have been in that first meeting, the next thing that we did, and these were all community leaders that already knew each other, but I did want to be intentional about trying to help break down barriers and build relationships. So we went around the room and we asked each person to share who they were representing, because some people were professional people that also may have been a mayor of a community. And one thing that the people in that room may not know about them. I still remember Elizabeth Buck with United Way shared that she worked her way through college at a funeral home. And in fact, I had worked my way through college at a funeral home as well, and I didn't know that I shared that with Elizabeth. So again, while Elizabeth and I get along well, we didn't know that common connection. And Andrea, I could be wrong on this, but I think you shared in that meeting that you were a cheerleader in college. And in fact, my daughter was a cheerleader in college. So there was a connecting point there. And if I have that wrong, Andrea, I apologize, but that's at least one of my recollections of that. My point is the Compact for Excellence, coupled with even a very quick hitter on a meeting of getting to know people a little bit better, starts to break down barriers and builds bridges where there is care and respect. And those are the foundational elements of civility. And then we can move into the difficult tasks of how do we focus on the communication necessary to focus on enhancing our work, our community with these challenging and difficult conversations. So I want to talk about communication next, and I've got one more video I want to show you to see what you think about the communication between these two budding business leaders. I love that clip because it's a great entry to what does communication look like. Oh, we've got two young people there. They definitely had eye contact. They looked like there was some verify, clarify going on. There was certainly some hand motions that were being mimicked by one back to the other. And it just is a reminder of we start at the very early age communicating with each other. And I'm convinced at this point in my life, it is a lifelong process that we can all continue to get better in. And one of the things that I found to be very helpful in communication in the work that we do is really thinking about how do we communicate with people? What do I do in preparing to communicate with people? Who am I going to be talking to? And how's the best way to respect and connect with them? It might be that this is a real simple quick hitter email, or maybe it's a text, or maybe this is one that requires a phone call, or maybe I want to see your face and the facial reactions on a Zoom call, or maybe this is one as we again start coming out of the pandemic that it's better to have people together. Again, these are challenges that we're working on. I'll share with you right now, one that's going on in our community right now is our Central Iowa Water Trails project. There's been some very heavy lifting done in the last 12 months around the Central Iowa Water Trails, and it's been challenging because many of those meetings have not been able to have people in person around tables with the personal communication and connectivity. So how do we maximize that, and how's the best way to communicate with that? And now as we go out and people are talking to council members about this and city councils to look at adopting the new governance structure and the 2080 agreements with that, how is the best way to communicate that? So I think the point I'm trying to make here is that you should always be thinking about how you're going to communicate and with whom. The next point is what outcomes do you want to achieve and what do you want to avoid? Now, this was a new for me in the last several years. I've spent a lot of time over the course of my career and in business and in the legislature focusing on what are the outcomes I want to achieve. I think it's equally important for us to think about what do we want to avoid. The outcome that I want to see, if that outcome comes at the cost of damaging a relationship with a friend or a community member, is it worth that cost? What are the things that I want to avoid as to other ancillary costs that I may not be aware of that this particular decision may have? And I think the other thing that we need to think about is when and where will be the most favorable context for the communication. And again, I've mentioned this already. I'll give you another example here at Drake University, where the Ray Center is. Phenomenal leadership under President Marty Martin. When President Martin came to Drake University and got involved in the culture of Drake and our leadership, I remember directly and clearly as I report to him directly, that he kind of laid out his expectations for email communications at the university. And if you were writing an email that was, 3 paragraphs long, he wanted you to think about picking up the phone and calling the person rather than writing the email. If you were the CC on an email, it didn't mean you needed to respond. Sometimes maybe your workplace may have had this. I remember times where we had emails, there might be 20 people on a CC and everybody felt they needed to respond. And then you've got all of this email traffic. And he really set the expectations of what's the most favorable context for the communication. And if it can be better handled by picking up the phone and calling somebody, then do that. And I think this really helps us as we have these, opportunities for challenging conversations in our community. You look at the opportunities that we have right now in front of us, things that we look at when we're talking about social justice and racial equity, when we talk about regionalization of opportunities such as Central Iowa Water Trails. These are not easy topics and they're not easy resolutions or solutions. But if we bring the commitment into being prepared when we communicate, I think we can continue the pathway we've already seen with some of the great work here. So a couple of quick hitters on communication that I know you're familiar with, but again, I want to bring them to you with intentionality and thinking around the concept of civility. And the first is just the basics of two-way communication. Seek to understand as well as be understood. It really is about active listening. This is a challenge for me. When you're a presenter and you're in sessions, you tend to listen responsively. I'm listening to what I'm hearing from somebody in the session and how I'm going to react and respond and tie that in. But it goes deeper than that. I would share with you, those of you know that me personally, this is a challenge for me at home. I'm the person that thinks the news can be on. I can be listening to the news, opening the mail, and having a conversation with Martha at the same time. And it's just not the case. We cannot multitask our listening and seeking to understand. And that comes from the reality of difficult conversations of needing to understand what other people's perspectives are. And I'll give you a brief example of this. Let's take at a time a very socially divisive issue. And if I were to put all of you on this webinar on one side of the issue and I took the other issue and we were going to have a conversation about this, and let's say that first it's to understand, and then you want to change my mind about the issue. So here's the issue I'm gonna lay out there. I believe the Earth is flat. You are on the position that the world is a globe and it's round. And I know many of the people on this call, you're very intelligent people. Now you're amped up and you're pretty excited because you know in your mind that I am wrong. In fact, you've got research, you've got data, you've got testimonials from astronauts, you've got photos from outer space. You know you can prove that I am wrong to me on this issue. But if what you do is come to me and you lay all of that out and all of the data and all of the facts, you've got one thing that you do not have that it would take for you to be able to change my mind. And it's a very simple thing. You do not know why I believe the world is flat. So if you're trying to have a conversation, first to understand, but if you're trying to change somebody's opinion or mind about an action or a belief, the very first thing you need to understand is, why do you believe that? So, Scott, why do you believe the world is flat? Well, I read that a former NBA player said that it was flat, and he was a highly respected person, and I believe that what he said was true. Well, in fact, that debunked quite clearly, and the source that I got the information and the person that said it was not accurate information. And if you want to learn more about our responsibilities with that, you'll want to tune into the next webinar, which is a panel discussion on how we address social media. My point in this webinar is you must seek to understand. You say, well, I know this, Scott. I got the Covey stuff years ago, seek to understand and be understood. There's a skill set to this. It's active listening, and it comes with the way we talk and communicate. I like that video of those two young children there, because I think what they were doing was verifying, clarifying. There was clearly restatement between the two of those. When you're having these dialogues, when you're entering into these conversations, bring that mindset of, I want to understand. I'm going to restate what I just heard you say. And if I'm not clear on what you said, can you help me to understand? I'll give you a recent working example. We just did a session for the Waukee Leadership Program this week, and it wasn't a date that worked in my schedule, so I had a team member here who is just exceptional in training, and I sent back to the Waukee Leadership Program that our person was going to be the lead person and the point contact. Now, when I say that to somebody, what's a lead person and a point contact, that meant that they were going to do the session. Waukee Leadership heard that, and what their interpretation was that that person was going to be the lead person and the point contact, but that I was still going to be doing the session. Now, it all worked out fine, but my point is, my lack of clarity in my initial communication back left a different impression than what was there, and I needed to verify that earlier than was done. So even those of us that are focused on this intentionally every day can find ways to be better about this. The other thing, when you're communicating, some quick hitters, think about I statements. I think, I feel, I believe, I plan to. It really generates your own feelings. It gets the communication going. What you want to do is you want to avoid the DART style statements. You're wrong. You never get this right. You caused this to happen. We all know when we have this level of communication that it puts us on the defensive, or it puts other people on the defensive. And putting an I statement in front of a you statement is not acceptable and doesn't work. I always think you're wrong. That's not what we're trying to get to. But you need to be cautious about the statements you're using and what you're putting people on. You don't want to lay out blame, insult, or attack if you're trying to resolve issues, and you resolve issues by first understanding where other people's perspectives are. The last thing I want to bring into this is just a little piece on negotiation. As I was thinking about civility, and we think about when I work in our workplace, we do this. A lot of times we'll bring in negotiation. People say, well, I don't negotiate. The union negotiates, or the management or leadership negotiates. I want you to think about negotiate. We negotiate every day. Every one of us negotiates in work. If you're planning a vacation and you're talking to your direct report or your supervisor about vacation, you're negotiating whether you can go or not go. I've been thinking of this in context of this remote work coming back into the workplace. And what does it look like? How do we negotiate roles, goals, and strategies to get the job done efficiently and effectively? And this is going to be a challenge for all of us as we move from remote back into the workplace. People have shown and proven that we can be very efficient and very effective without actually being in a workplace. So what are the contexts of how we should be coming back in? When we negotiate roles, goals, and strategies, you really need to think about what are your practical and ethical non-negotiables. What's it going to take to give a little and get a little, and to seek the maximum good for everybody involved? And I was thinking about this in relation to coming back to work. What are the non-negotiables? What are the meetings that I absolutely need to have people in this office for those opportunities? And what are the times when we can continue to work in a way that can give people the flexibility that they've been accustomed to and used to? And so I really think about this guide. I think the mantra that I would share with you on negotiation in any element where you're trying to resolve something, think of this mantra: I want, you want, we could. What is it that you really want to have done? I'd like to have this project and report done at this time with this type of outcome. What is it you want? You want the flexibility to be able to work from home and being able to get that done. What could we do to resolve that? Now, the key to this is also knowing what those non-negotiables are and the clear communication about those non-negotiables. And we all have those as well. And the last thing that I'd like to bring you is something that we call Carefrontation Fundamentals rather than confrontation fundamentals. When we have strong relationships and high-performing partnerships, and we have challenging issues, which we have in this community, which we have across this state, and probably in all of our workplaces, we're dealing with some challenging issues. If nothing else, how do we continue to move through this pandemic and recover from it? So when there are issues, I always think it's important, let's go after the problem and not the person. Many times, I was using an example with some health pharmacy students the other day. We're talking about the vaccine and the vaccination process. As people are rolling out and now it's open to everybody and people are having trouble getting appointments possibly due to the supply-demand issue, people really view this and want to attack individuals that they're not doing things right, whether it be the pharmacist that's trying to take the appointment or the person that can't help them in the store because it's all online. But it's not the person that's the issue here. It's the process issue. How do we get people into that process? So I give that as just a real world example that we're all dealing with right now. We've got a process around how do we get our COVID shots in our arms if we're choosing to do that. And the appointments are few and farther between than we would like to have them. That's not an individual issue. That's a process issue. What do we do to change that process? And when we're trying to affect impact in our workplaces, I would just counsel us all, when we're in doubt, let's handle the situation. Get after it. I'll give you one last example here. When I was a young leader in our organization, I had a great person working with us. I had a work ethic issue, and I just thought that they would see what the rest of us did, and they would get better. And they didn't do it. I didn't address it. I wasn't a good leader and manager at that point. And now with more experience, I would have handled that differently. And it would have been that I would have addressed it with clarity and expectations around habits and mindset and accountability for the outcomes we had. I've already mentioned to use I statements and avoid the you statements to seek win-win. The other thing that I think it's important for all of us to do is to own up to our mistakes and missteps. None of us are perfect people. And we can all get better when it comes to the issue of building relationships, both for the opportunity to create a more civil society, a civil workplace. I believe in a more perfect union. And when we do that, when we all come together and work on that together, it takes the intentionality. So I'm going to pull this down now. I appreciate your listening to me as I've shared these strategies. Again, the intentionality of what can I do to be better in my own workplace and in my community. And again, the last thing I want to say to you as I turn it back to Andrea to ask any questions we may have in chat is this. I absolutely believe this community, this place at this time can be the beacon of light for civility in going after tough and difficult issues. We have all the components right here in our own community. We've got a great track record of success. And if we bring continued intentionality to this, we can not only enhance and enrich our own community and our own workplaces, we will be the best practice in the country and the world of how you do things the right way to bring people together. So with that, I'll stop talking, Andrea, and I'll let you process any chat questions we may have or any that you may have.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. We do have some really good questions, and I just love that final message that you shared is that we can be the leaders in modeling good civility moving forward. And so the first question from Dan is, what are your thoughts on civility in social media, and how does someone even begin to address that? Now, I know we have a little bit planned for our next session, but let's tackle it now.
Well, Dan, the first thing that I would suggest to you is to sign up. I believe it's for April 22nd. We're going to have a panel discussion. And everybody that you are concerned about in their use of social media, send them an email and encourage them to sign up for this session. And I don't mean that flippantly or lightly. This is a topic we want to get after in this webinar. And I think what I try to use of this is what's the mindset you bring to your social media use? And that is, if it's to try and resolve a challenging issue that somebody believes different than you, that's not what social media was structured or built for. And so I don't think that social media is the place that you're going to change attitudes, opinions, or behaviors. It may be where you can learn. And I also believe in the little league philosophy, and that's public praise and private critique, right? If you see something great that you like somebody did on Facebook or Twitter or any of these platforms, let them know that publicly. If there's something that's out there that's disturbing and you think's not appropriate, don't call it out. We just did a session with the business record that's coming up about calling in. There was a great New York Times article about this. Don't call people out, call them in. Do it privately. So that would be my first, is just the mindset around how do you use it, and because the way you use it is a model for others, and that will be the topic of the next webinar. So I'll stop on that, and we'll answer more of that in the next session, Andrea.
Thanks, Scott. So one of the questions I received privately was, what role or level of importance do you think civility will play as we emerge from the pandemic?
I think it'll be critical. I think it's foundational. I don't believe civility is one more thing we have to put on the plate of how do we come out of this pandemic. I think it's the plate itself. I'm already hearing from people about the challenges that they're facing. It's been challenging enough with the anxiety and that the pandemic has brought us and the stress that that's brought to all of our lives. Now you think about somebody that has now just gotten into the groove of having younger children at home that are hybrid learning, and now you need them back in the office, and their children have been struggling. They're under high anxiety and stress. How do we balance this? Well, it comes from that clarity of communication. What are our direct and immediate needs, and how are we going to do this? That's just on the workplace front alone of how do we engage with each other. I was even thinking, I was using in our office the other day, the example of setting up these webinars. When would have it been that I would have driven down to the partnership and met with you, Andrea, Jay, and Tiffany to discuss this? And when was it that we could have a half-hour phone call and all be more efficient? Our workplaces will change because of the pandemic. They already have. What role does civility play in that? I'm an advocate that civility is the plate. It's the foundation. It's where we're thinking that we're challenged. It's where we're thinking that people are, have clarity on what we're doing, and they're not really clear, that we want to bring that to it. So I just encourage people to think of civility as the foundation of what we're doing, not as an add-on, I need to think about civility today.
Thanks, Scott. So I think what we'll have is one more question before we wrap up today. And the last one is, with emotions so high at times, especially when working through and talking through tough issues, do you have any advice on approaching emotionally charged emails, meetings, statements with care and civility? Great question from Tiffany.
Yeah, thanks, Tiffany. I really appreciate that. On the email one, I've got a really good and quick response. When you're charged up and you're fired up and you've written that email, hold on to it. Don't send it immediately. This is something that came to me as a suggestion when I was in the legislature, and I continue to do this. The immediate response, sometimes it's good just to write it out, but whether it be 15 minutes for you or an hour for you on the email, maybe a half day even, I'm not going to send that right now. I just want to come back, take a walk around, get into some other piece of business and come back. I think it's also important from a civility standpoint for all of us, and this will come up in our third webinar. It's important for all of us to understand what are our hot button issues, right? What are the ones that when somebody brings it up, now you've got me fired up, and I know what those issues are for me, and I've got to also be thinking about how do I react and respond. And again, it's the mindset. I'd ask you to think about this. What is the communication I'm having here? What's the outcome I'm wanting, and what do I want to avoid? Is it that, Tiffany, I want to understand your perspective better on this, and I want you to understand my perspective? Or is it, I'm going to try and change your mind? Because those are two different outcomes, and I don't believe you can change a mind without understanding that perspective, as I said earlier. So I'd really, the hot button issues for you, pause, collect yourself, and, we're all people. And I still drill this back. We all have our own challenges. We've all got our own stories. We've all got our own frustrations, and a little bit more of that lens of humanity to each of us, rather than you're wrong, I'm right, and now I'm going to show you. And now not only am I going to show you, I'm going to shame you in showing you. That really doesn't get us to where we need to be. And that's one of the things I love about this community. This is not a shaming community. This is an uplifting community, and I'm proud to be part of it. I'm proud to be part of these webinars. And I thank everyone for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you, Scott. Really appreciate all of your expertise, your insight. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Jay to wrap us up for the day.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Scott. Really enjoyed your presentation today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for your leadership, and thank you for your friendship. Really appreciate it very much. Just as a reminder, as was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, today's event has been recorded, and we'll be distributing it next week if there's anyone who is interested in sharing it with others who maybe did not have the opportunity to listen today. But I think a lot of really great lessons for so many of us. So Scott, thanks again for that. As also was mentioned, this is part of a series. We have a couple of other events coming up. This was one of the questions, as Scott alluded to, that we'll be getting into this in further detail, but we'll be having a panel discussion on civility on social media on Tuesday, April 22nd, also at 7:30 a.m. And then on May 5th, also at 7:30, we'll be having an event called Creating a Civility Action Plan. So mark those on your calendar, and we'll continue to dive into these important issues. You can register for all these events and our other partnership events on our website. And most of our events are free, so this is just a great opportunity and learning opportunities that just take a little bit of investment of your time and effort. Also, just wanted to share, some of you may have seen this, some of you may have not, but there was an op-ed that ran both in the Des Moines Register and the Cedar Rapids Gazette yesterday. It was co-authored by me and Doug Newman, who is the executive director of the Cedar Rapids Metro Economic Alliance, so my counterpart in Cedar Rapids. And the op-ed really encourages the Iowa legislature to work to find common ground solutions in the final weeks of the 2021 session. And it serves as a reminder that what we can accomplish when we work together with civility. It highlights a few of the issues that are not only important to the Greater Des Moines Partnership and to the Cedar Rapids Metro Alliance and Iowa Chamber Alliance, but also issues that have been identified by the governor and leaders in both the Republican and Democratic Party in both the House and Senate as priorities. So issues like childcare, broadband, housing, and how we need to come together and find common ground solutions and move our region forward. It also talks about how it's important as a state that we continue to be a welcoming state and not focus on issues that divide us. And so I would encourage you to take a look at that, and again, feel free to share that with any of your networks as well too. And then finally, just sort of repeating some of the themes that Scott talked about, I think that when you look at the success that the Greater Des Moines region has had over the past couple of decades, it really there's I think these themes that Scott has identified have been a huge part of that, right? It's the ability to work together as a region, right? In terms of whether it's downtown, suburbs, smaller towns, the rural areas. Collectively, I think we've done a great job of locking arms and identifying common ground issues and common ground approaches to issues and big projects. And that's been a big part of our success. I think also it's been our ability to work together with the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, to find common ground and to work together to do things that we're not able to do on our own, instead of spending a lot of time fighting with each other, which happens in a lot of regions, quite frankly. And then also too, I think just to be candid, right? Whether, this isn't a town when we're working on projects where you ask typically, are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? Are you an independent? Are you some other party? I think there's many of these meetings we go into, we have no idea what other people are. And quite frankly, I don't think it really matters. And so in terms of most of the stuff that we work on. And so I think that that's harder and harder every day. I think it's tough out there right now, but I think we do need to be that model of what can we do to find that common ground, to work together, find common ground solutions, move our region, move our state forward. We need to lead by example. And again, just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't focus on it and try to be better and try to be leaders and show that example. So thanks everybody for making time today. If these issues weren't important today for all of you, you wouldn't have taken time to be part of this today. So we do appreciate it. Look forward to the ongoing discussions, the ongoing hard work. And as Scott said, let's be that national model of civility. And there's a reason why we put it under our Capital Crossroads vision plan, and there's a reason why we continue to work on it. And so let's all double down on our commitment to do so, and make all of us stronger and be that beacon of light for the rest of the state, the rest of the country, and the rest of the world. So thank you so much. Look forward to our ongoing conversations, and have a great day.